talk to more interesting people than perhaps any other last 2 hours that we've had here on the Tech Ed Podcast. The next 2, 3, 4 hours are going to be exactly the same. Meeting the people that are driving the future of Industry 4.0, driving the future of advanced manufacturing, and that is exactly what we are talking about here over the course of the next 30 minutes as companies come from all over the world here to Rockwell Automation Fair to discover how to optimize operations and achieve results. It's just an amazing 2 days, and we're so happy that you could join us as we meet all these fantastic people. We're about to meet 2 more. And by the way, these are people with really, really cool business titles. The first one is Mark Grushey, and Mark is the Business Development Manager for, get this, Smart Cities. How cool is that when we talk to young people about the future opportunities in advanced manufacturing, the future opportunities in technology? How would you like to have that for a title? Or how about this one, the Head of Private Cellular Networks? That person comes to us in the form of James Rose. And we are talking with James and Mark both this morning on the Tech Ed Podcast. I'm going to start out with a question for James, again, the Head of Private Cellular Networks for US Cellular, by the way. And that question is this, James. You know, our customer base, our listeners here on the Tech Ed Podcast, obviously they know what cellular technology is. They live and breathe it. They understand US Cellular from that standpoint. But some of them are going to learn a new term this afternoon, or this morning rather, and that is this whole idea of private cellular networks. Before we get into that and dig into it in depth, let's talk about the use case and the application when we talk about a high-level overview of the digitization of manufacturing. So US Cellular, not just a company that people rely on to use their smartphone to communicate with each other, but also driving advanced manufacturing and digitization as well. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so great question. And I have to say first, thank you for labeling us both fantastic and interesting all at the same time.
Absolutely. Now you got to live up to it.
I'm humbled, yeah. So, you know, first I'll take your question with the first part, which is really like, why is US Cellular doing this? And the way I think about it is this. So, as you mentioned, US Cellular is very much a consumer-driven organization. Sure. Historically. We've been a wireless carrier for 40 years. What's happened recently, and I've been here for just under 10 years, but recently the thing that's been really interesting is we brought in a new CEO. His name is Laurent Tharivel. We call him LT because it's not an easy name to pronounce. But LT came over from AT&T.
Okay.
He had a long history of enterprise experience there. And then we also brought in a new senior vice president by the name of Kim Green-Kerr.
Okay.
Both of them have been here between 2 and 3 years now.
Great.
The ambition was, let's build an enterprise and IoT space, and let's do it from the ground up. Okay. And what does that mean? And this goes to your use case question.
For it.
So the industry has a tendency of laying out the kind of foundation of technology for cellular and then saying, hey, world, this is the way you should be interpreting the technology.
Right.
What we're doing is a little different. So what we're doing is we're actually understanding the applications and the use cases that drive the technology from the customer.
Okay.
And then we deliver the technology to meet those market needs.
Interesting.
So what does that actually mean from a philosophical perspective? It means that the organizations that we work with, essentially what they're doing is they're using our technology to cater to their existing strategy.
Okay.
Versus us saying, here's the way the technology is going to work. Now you need to go make your strategy aligned with that technology.
Got it. What a novel idea, actually going to the customers, going to the market and asking them how you can add value for them and what they're doing. Exactly. And then coming up with a solution, as opposed to, as probably too many companies do, put a bunch of engineers in behind a wall and let them just figure something out, and then hope to God 2 years later they've come up with something that somebody would actually want. So a really unique, maybe it shouldn't be, but we know that it is a really unique approach to understanding a market, approach to understanding product development, and then executing on a solution that actually adds value for customers, and that when you bring it to market it has value because they were part of really developing that use case and understanding.
That's exactly right.
Awesome. So now let's think about this term that we mentioned in the introduction, that being private cellular networks. I'll be honest with you, I know almost barely enough to be dangerous in that world. So like I said, everybody understands the cellular technology from a consumer standpoint, but what is a private cellular network and how does it impact a manufacturing operation?
So your point of view is probably not just felt from somebody sitting outside the industry. I would say most of the industry feels the same way.
Okay, so I shouldn't feel bad?
No, you shouldn't feel bad at all.
Got it.
If you Google private cellular or private 5G, you'll see all kinds of interesting organizations jumping in there, and fundamentally they could offer some pretty diverse, and you have spectrum. And so private cellular can be defined in many different ways.
Okay.
And so I'll be really brief with this because it can be
go
long.
ahead. Yeah, I'm sure it can get wonky, but this is fascinating.
That actually is what. So if you remember my last comment about how we tailor the technology to meet the customer strategy versus reverse,
right?
We are able to do that because we built a flexible range of solutions.
Okay.
So private cellular, you could see one organization say, well, private cellular means you're using a unlicensed spectrum like CBRS.
Okay.
Or you're using a enterprise level core and radio equipment. So you're actually owning and operating like a small network operation.
Interesting.
It could be that, hey, we're not in the actual management of a core business.
Right.
We do need the data on premise because of latency needs or because
Sure.
we want IT control of that data. But we don't want to actually own and operate a core. We don't want to have to install radio networks and figure out capacity and optimization is a painstaking process. So another type of solution would be you use the public carrier like us, you use our radios, use our core, but ultimately we just get you access to that data server.
I see.
So it's basically localized data.
Interesting.
It's ultimately it's a necessary part of offering any sort of edge compute solution using cellular.
Got it. So I'm hearing a couple different things as you go through that explanation, James, and it's really, is it a leasing model then for an organization that is partnering you with, or that's one way of doing it?
So we're exploring quite a bit. We're here at this event because we believe again in hearing the voices from the organizations that are thinking about it, especially in the manufacturing space. We work closely with Rockwell, and we're talking to the UWI CSI team because we want to know what the market's asking for. So that's one way to do it. But we also work with really large-scale deployments as well.
Okay.
Totally different financial model. And so to answer your question, we have organizations like in the utility space, they care all about spending capital.
Okay.
So it's not just thinking about what's my O&M. Their philosophy is I'll spend 8 times the amount of capital dollars to drive down the O&M cost.
Interesting.
And so when we're working with those guys, philosophically, totally different economic plan. With manufacturing, I anticipate it would be somewhat in reverse.
Got it.
They'll want low capital spend, and they're willing to take on more O&M spend as long as the value proposition and the use cases make sense.
Sure. Well, you came to the right place to learn and to partner, I'm sure, as you've walked around, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the interesting things that you've seen as we get a little deeper into the conversation. But it's just the energy here, the number of people here, I think 18,000 people over the course of a couple of days here at McCormick Place. You mentioned your partnership with Rockwell Automation, world-class company. Blake Moret, their CEO, prior guest here on the Tech Ed podcast, and in fact helped us get it started about a year and a half ago when we were just standing it up, so we appreciate that. You talked about the upcoming partnership or potential partnership with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Connected Systems Institute. We're definitely going to get into that as well as we talk a little bit further. But for our listeners who are still understanding and wrapping their brains around private cellular networks and US Cellular's position in that space, what are our listeners certainly familiar with Industry 4.0 technologies, so smart sensors, smart devices, how they interact with control systems, how network and cybersecurity plays into that, how data analytics can be layered on top of all of it. But tell us about the use cases from an industry 4.0 standpoint. So I'm looking at taking my manufacturing operation into the world of smart sensors and smart devices, gathering more data and being more thoughtful and predictive about how I'm running my plant. How does your technology fit into that?
Great question. And I guess the way I would answer that, I'll start really high and I'll get more narrow as I go with this answer. So I'm not going to reach there, but cellular can.
Yep.
So that would be one easy one. Another one is the concept of IT versus OT.
Yep.
So Wi-Fi can only handle so much. And so because the technology is matured enough to where deploying like massive IoT
costs you $10,000 to deploy might be $100 now, just because of the huge advancements, what we call the exponential economy. Moore's law is still alive and well in the world of manufacturing and across the world of processing data. And so now I'm doing that, and I've got all of these different edge devices and edge sensors that are taking up bandwidth in my manufacturing operation. And if I'm understanding correctly, there's certain limitations to Wi-Fi when it comes to the amount of bandwidth required by these edge devices, and cellular can be a great way to augment that.
Yeah, so that was the two of the kind of philosophies that I have. The third one, and this is actually the most interesting to me, is the idea of innovation.
Okay.
So 5G, for instance, it's a very young technology. It's not been around very long. And mid-band is just now being deployed. You have low band, mid-band, high band.
Okay.
The higher up the band, the more interesting the use cases become.
Okay.
And so where I'm going with this, though, is there's an opportunity. Think about before 4G came around. What was cellular like when you didn't have a 4G phone?
Right.
Maybe you got a 30-second clip from a football game, but
right.
that was about all your video needs that you got out of it. But think about Netflix and Uber. Like, I would have never thought that I would ask a stranger to go pick my food up and bring it to my house.
Right, exactly.
And that really became enabled by 4G.
Got it.
So now think that in terms of exponential growth, 5G is going to open up even more doors.
Wow.
And so what I want to say to your community here is you don't just have the value propositions from the use cases that you know right in front of your face. You're also opening doors of innovation, and your organization can evolve in pretty unique ways using very, very low latency, high bandwidth applications.
Very, very cool. So as I was sitting on Saturday afternoon, we had some visitors in from out of town trying to catch bits and pieces of the Wisconsin Badger game while I was sitting in a restaurant enjoying lunch and just kind of setting my phone off to the side, and had Hulu streaming, and all because of the the speed at which we can process data now. You're telling and all the innovation that came with that speed. So without that ability, there is no Netflix, there is no Hulu, there aren't all these huge deployment of edge devices. This just enables that next level of innovation.
You're exactly right.
I love it.
So think about Netflix's transition from being a mail-at-home DVD service to being a digital hub, and now they're one of the leading movie and television producers in the world.
So we're going to see use cases and applications for this that nobody's even dreamed of, and we'll be blown away by this next generation in the same way as we were by the last one. So speaking of thinking of the future, speaking of innovation, and I'm going to pull Mark Grushey into the discussion here. And by the way, you guys both have really cool titles. I got to tell you, Business Development Manager, Smart Cities, that's the cooler title. So, and I'm not going to have some discussions with the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee Connected Systems Institute. Huge partnership for Rockwell Automation, and they've been partnered with that organization for 4 or 5 years. Full disclosure, I actually have the pleasure of serving on the board of that organization. And so huge respect for the CSI, but I know you're having some discussions about how you might be able to partner and support the work going on at the Connected Systems Institute. Mark, tell us about that.
Yeah, so this came to us, I'd say, probably about 4 or 5 months ago. Myself, James, a few others on our team took a visit up there. I think it was like sometime in the spring. And, we saw the vision, right? We saw exactly what Rockwell is trying to accomplish there, what the students trying to accomplish there. And we are in the infancy of our program as well, right? Okay. We wanted to develop a strategy where we can incubate these use cases, right? And build them out from like an academic standpoint.
Sure.
Like a grassroots approach. So we are getting very close to finalizing.
Amazing at how over the course of the last 3 or 4 years the CSI has really stepped to the forefront of innovation, and whether it's digital twins, whether it's robotics and automation, really advanced industrial control systems, smart sensors, smart devices up and down the processes there. Jennifer Abely, who's instrumental in leading that organization, is a good friend of the Tech Ed podcast, a good personal friend. Mark Money, the chancellor of the university, another personal friend of mine. He's been a guest on the podcast along with then Provost Johannes Britz. So huge respect for what's going on there at University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. There's no better partner, by the way, when it comes to research and innovation. So you're definitely partnering with the right folks. Speaking of partnerships, and I'll open this up to either one of you or maybe both. You also have US Cellular does a pretty strong partnership with Rockwell Automation and with Ericsson. So tell us a little bit about those partnerships.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so one of those solution concepts that I mentioned, the idea of using the unlicensed spectrum, CBRS.
Yep.
That's something that we look to partner with organizations like Ericsson to ultimately accomplish that.
Okay.
They do a really good job at building and deploying those networks. We do a really good job at managing it.
Okay.
So the way we look at it is there's an opportunity there for us to not just help a go-to-market strategy with an organization, like kind of tell the whole journey, tell the whole story to the customer or to the market.
Sure.
Which is essentially, you're probably new to this, you probably don't want to, or maybe you do, but the idea of hiring a whole new team to manage the network is not going to be an easy thing to do. Why not have an organization like ourselves that's been managing multiple cores for decades do it for you?
Sure.
And it could even...
The direction we want to go is this whole idea of workforce. And it doesn't matter who we talk to. Nobody can find enough people, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We could do 3 hours on just why the workforce is so constrained. A little bit of optimism that maybe it loosens up here in the coming years, and as it does, and even whether or not it does, the types of competencies that we need students learning, that we need the workforce to have in the future, totally different than what they were in many cases 10, 15, 20 years ago. So as specific to private cellular networks, specific to your technology, what are the kinds of things that people need to be learning as they're going through their education journey to be effective team members when they get to US Cellular?
So my daughter started learning coding when she was 8.
Awesome.
I'm intimidated by her at the age of 14 right now.
I love it.
I think, so Carly Fiorina, she was a former VP at HP and I think Yahoo.
Yep.
She said it best. The thing about information is you need to make it meaningful. And what she says is the idea is to be able to collect the data and then be able to translate that data to something meaningful.
Okay.
And so that translation of taking just raw data and turning it into something meaningful, that's the area that the youth is going to really need to focus on. Because the thing about 5G is, and this is actually true about anything, I mean, even YouTube.
Yep.
The thing about information, there's always going to be more information collected today than there was yesterday.
For sure.
And it's going to continue to grow
Absolutely.
exponentially.
Yep.
And so the dilemma we're going to have when 5G is really fully deployed across the world is a pretty big data issue.
For sure.
And so the ability to translate data meaningfully and actually make it turn into something tangible, that's the magic. That's the area that people will really need to study.
I love that. And on so many levels and for so many reasons. Number one, it was a succinct answer. It was a unique answer. Number two, and you're exactly right. It's like, it doesn't really matter what endeavor you're in. The ability to take really complex technology, really complex ideas, complex information, and boil it down to the lowest common denominator that people like me can understand when somebody explains it. That is second to nothing in terms of being able to move your career forward, being able to be effective when you get to wherever your career is going to take you as a student. And your answer there, James, really speaks to anybody who's considering a career in STEM, anybody who's considering a career in coding, in data, around how do we take complex information, gather the sea of data, and make it understandable. And there's a couple of buzz lines, I guess, that we like to go back to. One of them is that we've heard that more data will be created in the next 3 years than in the last 30.
Yep.
I think the financial industry last year collected 7 times more data just last year than they did the year before that. I mean, it's just, we're swimming in a sea of data, and the ability to distill it. Credit to your daughter, by the way, learning to code when she was 8 years old. While we're on the topic of our families, our daughter is she is a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and data science major, and has an internship next summer with a digital transformation company doing exactly
fantastic.
that, which is taking, absolutely. So it's so much fun to watch, to watch those pathways. And how old is your daughter now?
14.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So
she's getting close.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just and it's a lifetime of deciding what they want to do with the rest of their life. And we always tell our kids and everybody else is, your education choice, your career choice is not a life sentence, right? Especially now. I mean, you can do something for a couple of years, move on to something different, but really, really succinct and interesting question. So if you're a high school student thinking about what comes next, think about what you're learning in your statistics class, in your computer programming course, in your advanced technology course, whatever, how you take that data, how you distill it into something simple. So let's talk now about partnerships with education. You talked about the CSI. Are there other ways that that companies, large and small, should be thinking about partnering with their local employer or with their local educational institutions, whether it's K-12, technical college, community college, four-year institutions, research institutions? How do you think about that?
So from an institutional perspective, what we're doing here is really trying to enable essentially what you're describing, which is ultimately, let's put the foundation of innovation for cellular specifically in a lab environment so that university accreditation can now prove out certain use cases and applications and say, hey, market, this is solid, we believe in this, the value's there, you should invest into it. The other side of it is also very much the innovation side of it. So like I told you, you don't know what you don't know,
right?
And there's a lot of area of opportunity to develop applications and use cases in-house. And so as an organization, if you do have a research and development arm and you're thinking about new ways to invest and get a competitive edge in your own marketplace, that's another way to look at it as well. So we can certainly steer some of the discussion from an application perspective. There are certainly some pretty straightforward use cases that the market's already conceptualized and it can deliver. There's so much more there that just hasn't been touched yet. And it's going to really take the private organizations in this country that are going to drive that innovation.
Absolutely. They're the only ones that can drive it fast enough to be able to keep up. And so it's interesting that, so much of what we're hearing from folks now that are advising educators and sharing thoughts with educators is really it's an and, not an or. So it's not, do we teach the application of cellular networks in a lab in an educational institution, or do we teach maybe the softer skills of innovation, problem solving, ideation, and you have to do both of them. Am I hearing that right?
You're exactly right. So the easiest, most linear comparison would be precision smart agriculture.
Sure.
So you see universities literally wrote curriculums for you have organizations like John Deere that are creating private cellular test beds to prove out autonomous farming applications. Sure. It's the exact same concept. So I appreciate your response. And I couldn't agree with you more. It has to be both a partnership between the public entities and the private entities.
Exactly. Public-private partnerships driving so many things in the world of education and research. We've got time, I think, for one last question. Our producer is giving me the signal that we're running a little short on time. I'll ask it to both of you. Maybe Mark will give you another chance to dive in here, the business development manager for Smart Cities. With US Cellular. Mark, you've been here at Automation Fair. It's an amazing day. I love this event. I come every single year. I'm always blown away by the technologies that are on offer here. As you've kind of made your way around this morning, tell us what's the most interesting thing or the most fascinating thing that you've seen so far this morning?
I've seen a lot of edge compute devices that are going on out there, a lot of sensor technology. I haven't had quite a chance to walk around too much yet, but I was here at Hannover Messe, IMTS back in September.
Yep.
And that was a much larger show, but I'm very interested in the edge compute solutions that I think we're going to be seeing here in the manufacturing space.
Absolutely, edge computing. I love it. I was here for IMTS as well. Two very different shows. Certainly. What I love about Automation Fair, I love them both, right? And I love all the examples of smart manufacturing deployment in the world of machine tools and manufacturing equipment that you see at a show like IMTS. We were the official education podcast, by the way, of that show.
Oh, nice.
So thanks for bringing that up. But the thing about Automation Fair, maybe a little bit smaller, but just the quality of the technology you see, and whether it's edge devices, robotics, automation, whatever it is that we're looking at, just the density of all that technology, really, really cool. I'm going to ask the same question of James Rose as we close up our time here with the folks from US Cellular on the Tech Ed podcast. James, you've spent some time here this morning. Some of the cool things that you've seen.
I'd say the most interesting thing I've seen was there's a stand here that has a group of people dressed like the traditional Star Trek series.
Okay.
That was really interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, you don't see that on every corner,
with,
right?
Vulcan.
Yeah, I love it.
No, I think the thing that's most interesting to me about this, and it's really the energy in the room. You have a lot of great ideas in here, and there's a lot of different perspectives.
Right.
And so what I think about here is walking around and actually getting perspectives from different organizations. One of the things that stuck out to me was the idea of remote control robotics. There's a couple applications being tested out in the back over here where folks are just basically using machinery to lift heavy things and move them from point A to point B. It seems very simple, but when you think about it from an employment attrition perspective,
right,
and you think about it from a safety perspective, seeing that scale up at a larger level for much larger organizations has really heavy implications on productivity and overall production of goods within the economy. But then the other side of it is tackling this workforce dilemma that you talked about earlier in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. The workforce part of it's so very important and a huge focus here at Rockwell Automation Fair in Chicago, Illinois. As you're walking around, you did get your picture with the Star Trek folks. It's amazing. It sounds a little bit cliche, but so many of the dream about technologies that we saw in shows like Star Trek in the 1970s, if it's about that. I mean, you're walking around and you're seeing some of the reality and the realization of some of those technologies.
They had tablets in the 90s. Yeah, it was kind of cool.
Exactly. So, and then if there's a theme for the discussion, it's really listen to your customer, listen to your market, and it sounds like, James, as you're walking through all of the things on offer here at Automation Fair, it's listening to what people are seeing, what changes are taking place in markets, and then how you and the team at US Cellular can put your innovation to work in those areas. So credit to the market, listen to your customers, and find